Thanks for that intro, and thanks for reminding me why I'm here. I've been asking myself, what am I doing here after hearing all of these talks so far that have been really inspiring. I'm going to be talking today about the importance of knowing yourself. And I think that I believe that the most compelling story that you can tell is your own. Telling someone else's story for them is going to be, you're going to lose the nuance, you're going to lose the passion. Yet, for some reason, in my own career, and I observe in other people, we often feel this pull to tell other people's stories. We chase that bright light, or we chase the money, or we see something else is working, and we try to tell that story. But I want to dig deep into this idea of how do you know yourself and how do you incorporate that into what you do. So a little bit about myself, to give you some context. I am a photographer and director. I work primarily with people, so I would describe myself as a conceptual portrait photographer. A lot of the work that I do tends to be kind of creating unexpected people in unexpected places. This, not to jump too far ahead of myself, but this is a little bit of some of my personal work, which has become a really important habit that I've created in my own life and career of creating work that's just for me, that hopefully eventually will inform the type of client work that I end up doing. Ernest Hemingway said, when you start to live outside yourself, it's all dangerous. And the first time I heard that quote, it kind of just went over my head. I think I just thought, well, yeah, of course, like, that makes sense. Like, it's a nice thing to say. But what I've discovered in recent years is I think there's a greater depth and richness to this quote that he was getting at that I think, at least for myself, I missed out on. And so, again, I want to dive further into that. I think another way of saying that is the importance of making informed decisions coming from knowledge of yourself. Anyone can make decisions. People make terrible decisions all the time. But I think learning to make informed decisions is a learned skill that takes practice. And I'll give you just one small example from my own personal life. Just a couple of years ago, so not that long ago, what I would consider the beginning of this journey for me. But I remember I went out to dinner with a good friend of mine, so he knew me pretty well, and he asked me, he said, do you think you're an introvert or an extrovert? And for me, that was an easy answer. I was like, I'm an extrovert. I've grown up with the knowledge that I am an extrovert. I love to be in front of people. I love to talk. I can turn it on in a party. I like to try to make people laugh. My dad was a pastor, so I grew up kind of around speaking and seeing that, and I was forced to go to all these events and like mingle with people. So that was part of my DNA. And he followed up my response of being I'm an extrovert, probably because he knew me pretty well. He said, well, when you're done with a party and you've just been around a whole bunch of people, do you feel energized and you want to be around more people, or are you exhausted and you need time? And I wasn't really sure where he was going with this, but I had to think about it for a little bit. And I did know, though, I was aware I need time. Like, I'm not energized. At the end of a party, I'm done. And he said something that just completely shattered my worldview and my view of myself. He said, you're an introvert. And I was like, no, I'm not an introvert, I'm an extrovert. And he said, you're an introvert, you need to recharge. And as I started to think about this, and as I started to kind of wrestle with this idea that I am not, in some ways, who I thought I was, I began to find a lot of freedom and a lot of relief in this idea, because this false idea that I was an extrovert and I was forcing myself into that, it was causing a lot of strife in my relationships. It was causing a lot of tension in my marriage. It was anything I was doing, it was affecting to some degree, because someone would come to me and say, hey, how about this? Let's go do this. Or what about this? And I would just say yes, because I'm inclined to say yes and I want to do everything. But I had no understanding of what I actually needed as a person. I wasn't able to plan ahead. I wasn't able to say, hey, I'm going to be at this seminar for 3 days with people talking constantly, and then when I go home and I have an ad campaign I have to shoot, and I'm going to be around 5 clients and 30 people for 5 more days. Like, now that I know this, I can say, okay, that next week needs to probably look a little different. Like, maybe I need to not do some client dinners that night, or I need to do whatever it's going to take, running or whatever, to recharge. And I wasn't doing that. I didn't have that information, and so I found myself in this just negative cycle of just kind of responding to what other people wanted of me, but not being able to say what I knew was going to allow me to be my best self. So I'm going to backtrack a little bit and give you a brief history of how I got into this and some of the mistakes I made along the way to kind of come into this new idea of the importance of being myself and integrating that into my work. I found myself in college. I was attending a small private university in Seattle, And I was asking myself and people around me, what should I do with my life? What should I do with my career? I was majoring in business administration, but I didn't know what that was going to look like. And so I was asking advisors and professors, what do I do with my life? I knew one thing. It was this very vague desire that I had. It was to be in charge of something. That was the only thing that I knew. And the advice I was getting back was, put in your time. In 20 years, you'll get promoted, and at that point, you'll be in charge of something potentially. And there's nothing wrong with that. That can be a perfectly fine career path. But for me, I knew that was not at all what I wanted. And to be fair to the people giving me advice, I was giving them very vague information. I didn't exactly give them a whole lot to go off of. But also around that time, I had discovered my grandfather's old camera. And I wasn't interested in photography at all, but I took that camera back to school and I started taking pictures of my friends. And again, it wasn't because I had an interest in photography. It was just purely a means to creating some memories that I would have to look back on someday. Well, one day I went back to California to visit my family on break, and just through casual conversation, I told them that I had been taking pictures. And it seemed like a normal conversation, but their response to this was what I would expect them to do if I had told them I just dropped out of college. They looked at me and they said, you know, you are going to a small private university. It's everything you and we can do to pay for school. We can't afford to be paying on, you know, frivolous things like photography when we need to be worrying about tuition. And so again, because photography wasn't really that big of a deal to me, I couldn't really disagree. So I said, well, I have this one last roll of film that I shot already, so I might as well go get it developed, and then I'll be done. And so I took the film into a local drugstore to get developed, and I went back the next day, and I had no patience, so I went in early all the time. Usually the film was ready. This time I went in, and there was a girl there, and my film wasn't ready, and she said, "Are you John?" And I was a bit of a troublemaker, and I had a guilty conscience, and so I was kind of a little concerned as to why she was asking me this. And she said, "The manager wants to speak with you." And I'm all too familiar with this direction of where things are going. And so I'm thinking about my choices now. I could run, you know. I didn't take the film, so it wouldn't be stealing. But anyway, I decided to stay, and the lab manager came out, and she was kind of just hitting this packet of prints on her hand and looking at me and furthering my fear. And she said, "Did you take these pictures?" And now I'm thinking, like, okay, admit to nothing. You know, like, show me the pictures first, and then we'll talk. And so she went through the pictures with me, and they were my pictures. And she said, "You have a really good eye." And that was maybe one of the weirdest things anyone had ever said to me, because I'm literally not thinking about photography. I'm like, my eyes are blue. Like, what about my eyes? Why would you say that? She said, "Have you ever considered being a photographer?" And I also had no idea what she meant by that. I had never met a photographer. You know, to me, literally, my dad took some pictures at birthday parties, you know, growing up, and that was it. That was the purpose of photography. And so she began to explain to me what that might look like, that there were people in the world who actually took pictures, and that was their career. And I think this came at a point where, again, I was looking for something to be in charge of. This, even in its infancy, seemed to me in some small part of my mind like maybe this could be something I could be in charge of. And it was also someone telling me that my voice could matter here. And I think without realizing it in hindsight, I was desperately looking for that as well. I wanted my voice to matter. And so as she was describing to me what a photographer does, I think I just left in mid-sentence, and I drove home, and I burst through the doors, and I immediately announced to my parents, I am going to be a photographer. And I fully understand how strange this must have felt when not 24 hours earlier we had a very civilized conversation about the fact that I would not be taking pictures anymore. And here I am telling him that that is what I'm going to be doing. So I went back to school and I finished my degree, but the whole time I'm just throwing myself completely into photography, and I'm doing anything I can get my hands on. Anything that people present to me, I will do it. So primarily I was shooting weddings and shooting for families and things like that. And for a while it was a lot of fun. I was invigorated by creating a business, starting something from nothing. That is still very exciting to me, but there came a point where I started to become very frustrated. I felt like I was like this caged animal, and it was confusing and scary because it started to feel heavier and more frantic than the first time I was asking myself this question, what do I want to be doing? And now I'm asking it again. But seemingly I'm in a place where I am doing what I thought I wanted to be doing. And so around this same time, I had also discovered something called editorial portraiture, which I showed a little bit of up there, but it's primarily people who are shooting for magazines. And They were taking pictures and affecting things as opposed to just documenting something. And I started feeling like I had something to say. I didn't know what it was. I also had this new need for greatness. This started kind of rising up in me. I wanted to be great at something. And so, cutting out a lot of the little details, I decided to cut off 90% of our income and our business, and I cut off all of the family and personal stuff, and I decided to just go for portraits and editorial work. And again, I had this idea that it's what I wanted. It was something I was seriously interested in, but it still wasn't based off of who I am and making an informed decision. What I was doing in that place was, again, same problem, just new environment. I was bouncing around. I was taking jobs that were coming to me. I was chasing the money. I was viewing everyone else as my competition. It was a very kind of toxic way to live and work, is like thinking that the only thing that's going to get me a job is some secret that I have or some relationship that I have. And so there was no community. There was no connecting with others, thinking that if I tell someone else who I'm working for even, they might look them up and get that job and I'll lose a job. And so this thing was just, again, I got to the point where same story, and it just happened over and over. I just kept bouncing around until I had my first kind of breakthrough or realization, and that was that you are the only thing that can make your work interesting. And it used to be that you could compose a picture really well, and you could you owned a camera, and you could push a button and invoice a client, and that was a really valuable skill to have. But that skill is of no value anymore. Taking a picture has no value. That's something that we talk about in the industry a lot. What is of value is having something to say, having a unique perspective. And this new idea for me that I am the only thing that can make my work interesting, there was confidence that came from that, and there was security that came from that. I started living into this and realizing that what I do is unique. No one else can replicate my decision-making process. Someone could shadow me for months or a year, and they could learn all of my lighting and all that kind of stuff. But I see work all the time that's lit beautifully, and that used to be okay. But again, now, if there's no soul to it, if there's no singular perspective or voice in it, what's the point? So something that I have an agent now, and something that my agent says all the time is, you will get reduced down to one sentence, and it's your job to fill in that sentence. Again, looking back, I used to take whatever it was that people gave me, and that led to more of that type of work. I would do portraits of, for small business magazines or things like that, and it would self-perpetuate more of that type of work, and that was the kind of cycle that I got caught in. And so this was a very exciting idea again, but you have to know what it is that you want to fill into that sentence. It's not enough to just know I can fill this sentence. You have to actually know what it is that you want to say. I love this quote by Bryan Cranston, the actor. He was giving advice to young actors, and this is something that I refer back to constantly. He says, I was going into auditions trying to get a job, and that isn't what I was supposed to be doing. An actor is supposed to create a compelling, interesting character that serves the text and present it in the environment where the audition happens and then walk away. And he goes on to talk about how there's power and confidence in that, in knowing who you are, knowing what your job is, and not worrying about whether or not you're going to get a job or if someone's going to hire you. That's so far outside of your control. That's not something that you can affect by worrying about it. I teach a workshop. It started off as a workshop for photographers, and it's grown now as a creative workshop where we talk a lot more about this idea of understanding yourself and incorporating that into the work that you do. And this is one of my favorite exercises that we do. I'll show 4 images on the screen like this, and I'll ask everyone in the audience, I'm not going to ask you guys to do it, but I'll ask everyone in the audience to shout out in just one word how each image makes them feel. And I gravitate to this one because there's always at least one person in the audience who says that this image makes them feel safe, and there's always at least one person that says this image makes them feel terrified. And what I take away from that, again, is that you cannot control what other people are going to think and feel. The only thing that you can control is what you are going to feel about something. So if you're going to create to please somebody, start with pleasing yourself. Start by putting yourself in a position where you will thrive, where Dave mentioned in the beginning of doing a job that you love. Like, how can you do a good job if you don't love your job? And so I love this example because it really drills home. Again, not only can you not please everyone all the time, but you can't even control who you're going to please. So you've got to start with yourself. And what has come from this now is, I talked earlier about I had the confidence and security that came from the knowledge that I am unique, but what I was missing was the action. I was missing the joy. I had this head knowledge, and I was even teaching it for several years before I was putting it into practice, but I went home one weekend after teaching this workshop and after thinking about this exercise, and I had to ask myself, what am I doing that I want to be doing? And I didn't have an answer for that. I think back to the movie Walk the Line about Johnny Cash, and there's that scene, I don't know if you've seen it, there's a scene where Johnny Cash is playing a gospel song in a recording studio, and I think he's playing it because that's what most people are playing, and it seems like that's what people are listening to. He's just doing what he thinks other people want. And the producer stops him, and I see this constantly in doing portfolio reviews. You can sniff out whether someone's working from a place of passion or whether they're working because they think they have to be doing it. You can taste that in a restaurant. You can see that in art. You can feel that in an experience like this. It's easy to tell. And so the producer stopped Johnny Cash, and he said, if you got hit by a truck and you were lying dead on the side of the road and you had time to sing one more song, one last song to let God and everyone else know how you felt about your time on this earth, that's what people want to hear. And that's what I want to do for myself. That's the song that I want to sing. And for the first time now in my career, through going through kind of this process and through going through therapy and teaching has forced me to kind of dive deep and figure out these things for myself. For the first time, I knew actually what that song was. I knew what it was that I wanted to be doing, but because of all kinds of excuses, time or fear primarily, I wasn't doing it. So I decided, okay, that's it. Like, I'm taking this final step. I need that. I want that joy in my life. I don't want just confidence and security. I want joy as well. So what that's led to is, this is a project I did 2 years ago called Uniform, and I won't get too much into it right now, but I self-funded it. It was an idea that I had on my own. Again, I talked earlier about I have this habit that I've formed of creating work just because. I have to make sure that there's no strategy involved. Am I doing this because I want to please a client or an ad agency? Am I doing this because I think people will hire me? Am I doing this because I've seen it and it seems like it's popular? If that's the case, it's not happening. Like, it's got to be because I feel compelled to create that work. And so that's what happened here. I spent more money than I care to admit on producing it, and it was an idea that I felt like, it's very vague, like, will people get it? Anyway, this project now has led to the start of my fine art career, where I had my first solo exhibition this past January. Another example would be, I started taking, this is my family, we got out not that long ago, but I started doing a family picture every year. We've been doing it about 8 years now. And the sole purpose for doing it was purely just because I thought it would be fun. I wanted to do something that would be enjoyable. I wanted to make memories. I didn't want to just be doing what I do for other people all the time. I want to be able to look back in 30 years and say, gosh, I'm glad I did that. I wish I hadn't just shot for other people and never thought about what I actually wanted to say. Oddly enough, again, and this isn't the strategy or the reason behind it, but this series comes back to me at least 40 to 50% of the time when some agency or company comes to me for some large campaign. They always have at least one of my family pictures in there, which I still feel self-conscious talking about, but it's like people will come to me now and they'll say, we love what you do, but do it for us. It used to be that people would come to me and they'd show me other people's work, and they're like, this is what we want. Fit this, this hole for us. You're a square peg, but fit this round hole kind of thing. Now, my personal work informs the type of work that I'm doing. I'm filling in that sentence, and it's perpetuating the type of work that I want to be doing. To wrap things up, I want to leave you guys with an exercise that I also do at my workshop, and I found this to be incredibly helpful, especially as I started on this journey. Obviously, I'm very visual, and so I collect analogies and quotes and ideas and exercises, and I refer back to them constantly. But I write down 7 descriptive words about yourself. These could be ideas, attitudes, or feelings that you value. If these are true and genuine, ultimately, these ideas and these words should be reflected in your work. Now, it's going to take time. Initially, I think I wrote down some words that maybe weren't true. They were like, I wanted to be the extrovert, but the reality was I wasn't. So after wrestling with it and struggling with some of these things, I'll give you an example of my words as they are now. And now when a project comes through, let's say someone comes to me with a project or I have an idea, there's a million different ways I can go about it. but I can hold that project up to this list of words and I can say, is it bold? Is it timeless? Is there confidence in it? Is it simple? Is it genuine? And if I'm getting outside myself, I know that it's dangerous territory. I know I'm going in the wrong direction. This has been a great roadmap for me. And just to give you another quick little example of how this plays out, greatness, for example, not my greatest quality when it comes to my personal life. The expectations I put on others and the impossible expectations that I expect of others, that's something I'm trying to work on. But I do know after time and struggle that greatness is important to me. Now I'm trying to turn that expectations of others into trying to be a great dad, trying to be a great husband. But no matter what I do, that need for greatness has always been there. One thing that I've discovered in hindsight, it wasn't something I even did consciously, but looking back and now maybe more consciously, when I photograph people, I always photograph people from a lower angle. I'm looking up at them, which projects this feeling and idea of greatness. If you photograph someone from above them, it's demeaning. It feels like you're minimizing them. So in all these words, I could go on and on. There's all these tangible ways that they come into my work and what I do. But I would encourage you guys to wrestle with this, think about it for yourselves, and see if this strikes a chord and allows you to kind of go down this path for yourself of who you are and how you can stay within yourself and out of the danger zone. In wrapping up, I'll share one last personal project. I started this about 4 or 5 years ago, and most of my work, as you saw earlier, it's very produced and there's a lot of lights, and usually we don't take a picture unless we've talked about it for a month, which I do love. I love the collaboration. I love the planning and the strategy that's involved with that. But it got to be a little stale at one point, and I had just gotten my first iPhone, and so I decided that I would start taking random, spontaneous portraits of people that I see on the street. The only rules are it has to be spontaneous, it has to be someone that I'm compelled to photograph, and it has to be natural light. There can't be like lights or anything like that. So I started taking these pictures, and it was hard for me because they were imperfect. iPhone is a great camera for a phone, but it's really one of the worst cameras you could use if you're comparing it to professional cameras. But it taught me to fall in love with interacting with people, with connecting with people. There was also something about having a phone up here instead of this big, intimidating camera in front of your face that allowed for a different interaction. And again, in the same way that I showed with my family picture and some of these other things, this project has now led to my largest ad campaign that I've ever shot in just the last couple of months. I have clients constantly coming back to me with this personal work that they want to see reflected for their brand. So the point of me showing you this is tonight I am going to attempt to take a portrait of each of you. We're not going to have a lot of time, obviously, but I would encourage you, if you are able to think about that list of 7 words and think about who you are or who you want to be. And I'd love for this portrait to be a reminder of this weekend and everything that we've talked about. It shouldn't be your, it can be, but don't think about a new LinkedIn profile picture. This isn't to impress other people. This is meant for you. This is to be a reminder to you of who you are and the things that we've talked about here. So thank you so much. I really appreciate your time.